Welcome to the very first instructional video from Teacher Baker Maker. Today we're going to be making a sign that can be used for a drive-by parade. These have become very popular during these past few months as people are not able to have in-person parties with large crowds. So you may have been invited to a drive-by birthday parade or drive-by baby shower, bridal shower, school parades, lots of different choices for parades. And typically to make a sign like this, the most commonly used material is a sheet of oak tag. Now, since I'm going to be using my Cricut cutting machine to do the lettering on my sign, I am going to be using Cricut Design Space software, which is free for anybody who has a Cricut machine. So when you first open up the Cricut Design Space software, it looks like a giant grid. Now, we want to make sure that we can actually see enough of the canvas, so to speak, to fit our entire sheet of oak tag. Now, when you first open up Cricut Design Space, you're going to see that your canvas only gives you an area of about 13 inches by 7 inches. And a sheet of oak tag is much larger than that. So I'm immediately going to shrink this down a bit so I can see more of my canvas. So as you can see, by shrinking it down to the 25% view, I can now see 52 inches across the top and about 28 inches down along the side. Now, since a sheet of oak tag is 28 inches by 22 inches, I want to give myself a guideline on my canvas, because if I just have to keep looking at the rulers the entire time to make sure that my design is fitting in the space, it can be very frustrating. So what we're going to do is we're going to draw a sheet of oak tag real quick. We're not actually going to print the sheet of oak tag on our Cricut. This is just for us to use to give us a rough idea of how big our actual sheet of oak tag is. Now, since my oak tag is rectangle, I'm going to go over to shapes over here and I click on shapes. Now, when I click on shapes, there's no rectangle. However, all squares are rectangles. So if you click on square, it's going to automatically insert for you a small square, only about 3 inches by 3 inches. If I try to turn this into a rectangle by dragging on the corner, it will make it bigger, but it will constantly keep it as a perfect square. We want a rectangle that does not have 4 congruent sides. So what I'm going to do down here, where there's a little lock, I'm going to click on the lock. And what this does is it unlocks the dimensions. Now you can use the green arrows here to now drag it to the size you want, but that could be a little bit tricky because you'll notice it actually goes up to the thousandths of an inch. So instead, up here where it says size, I know I want something that's 28 by 22. So I'm going to just manually type that in, 28 by 22. And you'll see that once I hit enter, it will automatically draw my rectangle to be exactly 28 inches across the top and 22 inches across the side. Now, it also makes it a very dark gray. That's going to make it difficult for me to see my design once I start putting my design on it. So I'm going to go up here to where it says line type cut. I'm going to click the gray rectangle next to that, and I'm going to choose a lighter gray. Again, I just want to make something that's easy for me to see my design on. Okay, so far we have our blank sheet of oak tag. Now, I'm going to be making a sign for a last day of school parade. So I am going to keep my message short and simple because the kids are going to be driving by. Since it's for an elementary school, I'm going to be using a print font because children will just find that much easier to read. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to type my message. So if I click on the word text, it's going to open a text box. Now, don't get nervous about the size of this text box. This is just for you to type in your words. So I'm going to pretend that I want to say, have a great summer. Now, if I hit enter, it's going to make it relatively small. So what I want to do is I want to make it a little bit smaller than the width of the page. So by dragging the message around, and sometimes it can get tricky because it wants you to grab the whole sheet of oak tag, but if I kind of stick it in this corner and then drag, 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 I'm now taking up most of the page. I don't know if I necessarily want the whole message on one line, so I'm going to go back into it and double click. And instead, I'm going to make a line cut right there. So now it says, have a great summer. But I want it centered. So if I go up here to alignment, I can choose left, center, or right. I'm going to choose center. And now I see that I have plenty of room to make this even bigger. So I'm going to drag it over a little bit. Okay, now in terms of the font, you'll notice that when you install the Cricut Design Space software and you click on the pull down menu next to font, it's going to open up a menu that gives you lots and lots of fonts that Cricut is going to sell you. You'll notice they can be quite expensive. I mean, I'm seeing $4.99 for each font. Well, there are many fonts out there that are completely free that you can download onto your computer. And so I'm going to click on System. These are all the fonts that were either pre-installed on my computer or ones that I have downloaded for free from various websites, such as Dafont, D-A-F-O-N-T. The font that I want to use today is called KB Stick to the Plan. And again, this was a free font I downloaded. So I can either scroll down through here alphabetically until I get to KB, or I can just go up here where it says Search Fonts, choose KB. Now you'll notice I have a few different KB fonts here. I want KB Stick to the Plan. So if I click on that, it's automatically changed into that font. Now notice how it's now a little bit too big for the page. So I'm going to shrink that back down just to make it fit. There we go. And then I could drag this over that way. Okay, so I like that. But black letters are kind of boring. I mean, part of the fun of having a Cricut machine is being able to choose any color of cardstock or material that you might have. So I'm going to make this red. So up here, where there's a black box, I'm going to click on that. And instead, I'm going to click on the red. Okay, so now this is a sign that's going to be on behalf of myself and some other fifth grade teachers. So I'm going to add another text box. And this time I'm going to put love, comma, the fifth grade teachers. Now you'll notice that it automatically made it in that stick to the plan font. I did not have to choose that font again. It automatically defaulted to that. So that's a nice feature that Cricut has, is that you don't have to keep choosing that same font. Now, if you wanted to make it a different font, by all means, you can go up here to the font and you can choose another one of the system fonts that you have for free, or you can choose one of the paid fonts through Cricut. Now, I want to center this just like I had centered the other one. I want to make it bigger, so I'm going to make it bigger by dragging and kind of sliding it around a little bit. Now, when you're making one of these drive-by signs, you want to try and make your letters large and bold because, again, people are trying to read your sign as you're moving or as they're moving. So you want to keep it short, sweet, and bold. So that's why I happen to like this Stick to the Plan font, because it's a nice, bold, kid-friendly font. Okay, so I have my message. I want to change this to blue, so I'm going to click on the message down here. I'm going to click on my colorful block again, and this time I'll choose this dark blue purple color. Okay, so far my sign's looking pretty plain. I don't have any images on it. I want some type of summary pictures. Now, if you were to go to images over here, you can search the Cricut images. But again, a lot of them you have to pay for. I've learned the hard way after I've made certain projects and spent lots of time making projects, only to discover when I go to create the project that it's now going to charge me money to actually create it. So instead, if you Google the name of the picture that you want, chances are there's going to be a free SVG or JPG or GIF or PNG or BMP file somewhere out there. So I already downloaded this sun, and then I uploaded it into Design Space. So now I'm going to insert that image into my project. Now you'll see it inserted it in this top corner. I would think it would look nicer down here. And it's looking kind of small. So what I can do now is I'm going to stretch it out a little bit in this corner. Let's see, yeah, like about 6.5 inches or so in each direction. That looks pretty good. Okay, now it's looking kind of lopsided. I want another picture for over here. So I'm going to go back to my upload feature. I already had uploaded this picture of an ice cream cone into Design Space. So I'm going to click on that and insert that image. It just takes a second for it to load. Okay, now I'm going to drag it down to here. Now, it's looking very straight up and down. So if I go over here to this curvy arrow, I can use that to tilt my ice cream cone. I can enlarge it then to kind of take up more space over here. I think I like it. Let's see, maybe about that big. Okay, and again, I can kind of play around with this, slide it around a bit. I can slide this down. Now I'm going to be printing all of this on cardstock. So once it prints, I can technically move these around to wherever I want on the page. You know, if I wanted to flip flop and put the sun over here and the ice cream cone on the other side, or if I wanted to put them up in the corner, or, you know, make curved letters that way, I can, because I'm just using cardstock. I can tilt it and rearrange it as much as I want. But for now, I'm liking this. I'm liking this arrangement. So what I want to do now is I want to save my project. So I go up here to save, and I'm going to call this Great Summer Sign, and then click save. Because Murphy's Law, as soon as you don't save something, that's when the power will go out and you just lost your work. So always remember to periodically save it in Design Space. Now, if I were to try to make this right now, if I click on make it, it's going to tell me my project is incompatible. Now, the first time that happens to you, your stomach is probably going to sink and you're going to think, what just happened? I just spent all that time. Well, what it says is that you can select OK and adjust the affected layers. So if you go over here to the layers, you'll notice that 3 of them have yellow triangles with exclamation points. This is telling us that these 3 parts of our design are not compatible with our machine. Now you'll see my blue message, love the 5th grade teachers. It says it's too large because a Cricut machine is only 12 inches wide. And this is saying that it's too large. Now, since it's a print font, I don't need all these letters connected together. It's not like it's cursive where you want the whole word in one piece to make it easier on yourself. I can have this print out as separate letters. So what I'm going to do is, if I click on this part of the message, see up here where it says ungroup? If you click on that, what happens is it makes each letter its own little box now. So instead of it being one giant message, it's now all separate letters. And you'll notice when I did that, that yellow triangle disappeared, because now Cricut can reorganize those letters to make it fit onto the mat. Now I'm going to do the same thing now with the red part of my message. Have a great summer. Again, if I click on that yellow triangle, same message. It's too large. So I am going to ungroup all of those letters. And again, now you'll see each letter is its own box. Now, word of warning, if you start to try and move these letters around, they will not be perfectly straight anymore. Or if you accidentally, drag the arrows to make it bigger or smaller, you're going to have certain letters that are no longer in proportion to your other letters. If that happens, don't panic. Just click the undo button up here a few times until you get it back to the way you want it. Okay, so we resolved the size issue with both of our messages, but now it's telling me that the one remaining thing that's too big is that gray rectangle. Well, we're not printing out our sheet of oak tack. That was just to help us lay out our design. So what I can do, notice how there's an eyeball here. If I click on the eyeball it's now hiding the oak tag. That means it's not going to cut that out. So for this time while we're making the project, I'm going to hide the oak tag. Now, if I go back up here to make it, you will see it is now allowing me to make this project. Now, the Design Space software will put the print then cut images first. What print then cut means is rather than Design Space trying to print out certain parts of this on light yellow cardstock, certain parts on dark yellow, certain parts with black, certain parts with dark, that would be a nightmare to try and glue together at the end. So instead, I'm just going to print this on my regular printer. I happen to have a laser printer, but you can do this on a laser printer or an inkjet printer. You'll notice that it then puts this black box around it. It's going to print it with the black box, but what will happen is after you print this on your regular printer, you then put it onto your Cricut mat. Now they're showing it on a gray mat. There's no such thing as a Cricut gray mat. If you're printing this out on cardstock, you should use the light blue Cricut mat. The color makes a difference. Light blue is the least sticky of the Cricut mats. If you use something that's too sticky, when you try to get the cardstock off the mat, you're going to end up bending it and damaging it. So use the light blue for cardstock paper. But again, when this first prints, it's printing on my regular printer that I use to print, reports off of. This is not going to print on my Cricut. The Cricut is going to cut that sun out once it's been printed. And this black box around it is the guides that the Cricut eye will use. When you load this in your Cricut machine, there's a little light bulb. And when you first load the mat on a print then cut project, you'll see the Cricut is going to move the mat around so that the light bulb can detect where all corners of this black box are. Once it detects that, it will then cut out your sun along each ray. So rather than you having to cut out the fine details on something like this, the Cricut will cut it out for you. Now, before I do that though, I'm just going to show you something down here. You'll notice that for my letters, everything's all shuffled, but that's okay. I can reorganize these letters once they print out to put them in the right order for my message. However, notice how the default size is 12 inches by 12 inches. If you happen to have cardstock that size, great, but that tends to be more expensive cardstock. You can get the multi-packs of cardstock for a lot less money, and those would be 8.5 by 11. So if I click on that pull-down menu, I'm going to choose 8.5 by 11. Now, since that's a smaller sheet of paper, we're not going to be able to fit all of our letters on one sheet. So you'll see it automatically spaces them out onto two sheets. So this first sheet is going to be almost completely taken up by our letters. But the second sheet, we're just going to have one R on that sheet. If you happen to have a scrap of cardstock, this is a perfect project for it because you wouldn't necessarily need an entire 8.5 by 11 sheet of cardstock for it. You would just need something that's about 2.5 inches by 2 inches if you didn't have something that's this full size. So again, just something to keep in mind if you want to not be as wasteful with your materials. I'm just going to scroll down here to look at my blue. So for my blue, again, it's already set for 12 by 12. I'm going to change that to 8.5 by 11. And this time it all fits on the one sheet of blue paper. So I don't have to worry about having to load up the mat a second time with another sheet of blue paper. So now I have everything all set to go here. But notice how my cursor was on the blue sheet. I've made this mistake before. You want to go back up and make sure you click back on that top sheet again. So that way, when you do go to cut these things out, you have the right materials loaded up at the right time. So if I click continue, you will see that because this first image is a print then cut image, it's going to say, yes, send this to the printer. And then it's going to ask me which printer I'm using. So I happen to have a color LaserJet. Click that, click print. Once that prints out on my white cardstock, I would then put it onto my Cricut mat And the Design Space software is going to walk me through this, and it's going to tell me to then load it into my Cricut machine. It will then cut out my sun. Once it's done with the sun, it will then automatically go down to the ice cream. It will then ask me if I want to print this first. And again, I would click that I am going to print it. I am going to cut it out. And then it would automatically move on to the red. At that point, it will ask you what type of material you're using. So I like to set it for this cardstock setting. I have the Explore Air 2 that has the dial where you can choose custom. So that's what I usually do, even though there is a setting on it for cardstock and light cardstock. I've had pretty good luck by just choosing custom and then choosing this cardstock option. Once you have everything cut out, you can then glue it onto your oak tag, and I'll give you some photos of the products that I've used to glue things down. And I'll also show you some photos of the finished product in the blog. So hopefully this was helpful for you today. This is a great first project for somebody who's just getting started with their Cricut because it can be done fairly quickly. You can make a great sign. You can use the sign over and over again, particularly if you're invited to quite a few drive-by birthday parties or something like that. So this is definitely a great way to use your Cricut. I hope you've enjoyed this, and please stay tuned for other ideas that come up in my blog of Teacher, Baker, Maker.